Good morning and afternoon, friends, as the case may be. Thank you for joining us on our national monthly webinar for Family Justice Center Alliance here at Alliance for Hope International. We are so excited to have Anita Ahuja joining us today and presenting. Just a reminder that attendees are muted throughout the presentation, and you'll be able to send your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be sharing those at the end of Anita's presentation. We are so honored and excited to have Anita present for us today on best practices for meeting the needs of victims of mass violence and terrorism. My name is Natalia Aguirre. I am your host today, and I'm joined here with Riley Shore, our program assistant for the Family Justice Center Alliance, who's handling all tech things and making sure that all your questions get answered. So thank you, Riley, for all your work on this webinar. As a reminder, before we get started, our webinar presentation is being recorded and will be posted on our website. You, as an attendee, will receive an email with instructions on how to download and view all of the materials and the recording, and you will also be able to access the certificate of attendance. As a reminder, throughout the presentation, if you have questions, please feel free to submit your written questions through the chat feature or the question feature on the GoToWebinar panel. Riley will be collecting those, and at the end, we will have a question and answer with Anita and make sure she answers all of the questions you might have. Before we get started, we always like to thank the Office on Violence Against Women, the Acting Director, Laura Rogers, and specifically our Program Manager, Kevin Sweeney, for their leadership, their vision, and for making this presentation possible under our Family Justice Center grant. And I always like to give a shout out to our team, to our fearless leaders, Casey and Gail, who are right now in South Carolina presenting at the NAC and holding an advanced strangulation course there. Here you see a picture of me and Riley and the rest of our wonderful staff who make all of this work possible and keep us moving day to day. So thank you to all of our team. And as always, if you have any questions, whether it's about Family Justice Centers, Camp Hope, or the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, please feel free to reach out to any of us and we will make sure you get in contact with the right person. We're also really excited and asking for all of you to save the date for our Family Justice Center conference. The conference will be held May 19th to the 21st. Here in San Diego, we have moved our conference to the Intercontinental. It is in downtown San Diego. It's an absolutely beautiful brand new hotel. And we're not only excited about the hotel, but even more excited about the speakers and the content that we'll be bringing to you. So again, save the dates, May 19th to 21st here in San Diego, and we'll be having our pre-conferences on May 18th. So you can find information on how to register on our website, familyjusticecenter.com, and you'll also be hearing more about that in the coming months. And with that, I want to go ahead and introduce Anita Ahuja. She serves as the manager for mass violence response and is the ombudsperson for the crime victims with the California Victim Compensation Board in Sacramento. She is currently focused on mass violence emergency response planning and in assisting with meeting the short and long-term needs of victims of mass violence in California. Her experience includes managing federal crisis response grants, support groups, and victim services for September 11th victims in California. She also manages federal grants for the Anti-Terrorism and Emergency Assistance Program in the Federal Office for Victims of Crime to assist with the victims of the 2015 terrorist attack in San Bernardino and the victims of the 2017 shooting in Las Vegas. Anita is currently working with Ventura County to assist the victims of the borderline bar shooting in Thousand Oak and the Santa Clara County to assist with the response to the shooting at the Gilroy Garlic Festival. Since 2015, Ms. Ahuja has partnered with law enforcement to present the Leave No Victim Behind conference series, which provides training on best practices for responding to mass violence incidents and effective community partnerships for assisting underserved victims. She is certified in advanced crisis response, critical incident stress management, and has served as a community chaplain. Ms. Ahuja has served in management roles in public affairs and policy and training at the California Victim Compensation Board. Her background includes working for the United States Senate, the California State Senate, and the California Governor's Office. Her credentials include an MA in counseling psychology and a BA in political science and rhetoric. And so with that, Anita, we're so honored and thankful for your presentation here with us today, and are really excited to learn and hear more about the content you have to share. So welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalia. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much to the Alliance for the kind invitation to join you today for this presentation. We do have a lot of material to cover, so I'm going to get started right away, and just want to quickly review what our goals are for the presentation this morning. We have 5 objectives, and one is to learn how victim service agencies have responded to mass violence incidents here in the state of California, to learn best practices and effective strategies for assisting victims of mass violence, to understand the short and long-term needs of victims of mass violence, also to learn how local, state, and federal resources coordinate response efforts, and finally, to learn how to incorporate these best practices into a mass violence emergency response plan, which I hope everyone participating in this webinar already has, but we will find out towards the end of the presentation. We are going to review our responses to some prior incidents. And these incidents include the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting in Las Vegas, which happened on October 1st, 2017. The Borderline Bar and Grill shooting in Thousand Oaks that happened on November 7th of 2018. We're also going to talk about a little bit of a different response to the shooting and killing of a law enforcement police officer in Davis, California. We will also address the shooting at the Chabad House in Poway, which happened in April of this year at the end of Passover. And we will also review some of the response items connected to the San Bernardino terrorist attack that happened on December 2nd, 2015. All right, so first, October 1st, 2017, we had close to 22,000 people attending the Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas. It was a 3-day country music festival that was winding up on a Sunday evening. They had their final headliner come out, Jason Aldean, when a shooting broke out. We had 22,000 people in attendance at the event, plus approximately 2,000 vendors. And it was late at night on a Sunday. The shooter was shooting from a hotel across the street and shooting down at the festival where people were hiding. They were getting trampled on as they tried to escape. And as a result, because it was such an overwhelming number of people, there were many, many off duty law enforcement officers, fire, and EMS personnel on site who were helping to get victims out of the vicinity, to get injured victims to the hospitals and emergency rooms. Many people were taking and transporting people in their trucks to get them to the assistance that they needed, and it truly was an overwhelming response. The county, Clark County in Las Vegas, did a tremendous response effort through their emergency manager, John Steinbeck, and many, many other people on that emergency management team. They opened a family assistance center at the convention center, and that is because of the huge number of people that were impacted by the incident. That family assistance center was open for a little over 3 weeks and served approximately 4,356 people during that time. The Family Assistance Center has since transitioned into an ongoing resiliency center in Las Vegas, where the center continues to serve all the victims of the tragedy. And they also provide remote assistance because many of the victims reside outside of the Las Vegas area. So there's a virtual component to this resiliency center. Now, going back to the number of people impacted, of those 22,000 people in attendance at the concert, approximately 65% were from California. And therefore, the morning following the incident, we contacted the Nevada Victims of Crime program to collaborate on how we could best respond to the many, many needs that people were going to have. There were 58 deceased victims, and 35 of those were from California. I'm also sad to report that over this past weekend, one of the victims of the shooting, she was shot 4 times and as a result became a quadriplegic. She succumbed to her injuries sadly over this past weekend. So now we have 59 deceased because of this incident. So what we did is we talked with the Nevada Victims of Crime program, and we created a joint application so that if you were a victim from California, you only had to complete one application to be eligible for benefits from both states. And this would allow for both states to assist victims with the benefits that were allowable at the time. And so we were able to collaborate on that. One of the challenges that we had was getting a list of victims. There was there were so many people in attendance at the incident. It was really difficult to have one solid victim list. Everybody seemed to have partial lists. And we contacted the FBI, we contacted the Red Cross so that we could at least find out if they had lists of people who had suffered catastrophic injuries. We also embarked on a major outreach campaign, and that included a public service announcement that we put together to allow people to know that there was assistance available for victims of this incident. Many people to this day still don't realize that every state in the country has a victim compensation program. So we worked hard to educate people through a public service announcement, through a social media campaign. We also created a resource page on our website that connected people to our program and the many resources that we were offering, as well as the Nevada program. We also found during our response that online on Facebook, many people were setting up online support groups. And this was a venue where people could come online and hold private support group meetings where they could communicate with one another. And what we did is contacted the administrators of these Facebook pages to let them know that we were available and the benefits that we provided, and asked these administrators to share the information with the people who were privately logging on to participate in these support groups. Another response for this incident is that we went to Las Vegas to meet with the Nevada Victims of Crime program to see how we could assist on getting a database system together to monitor the applications so that we could work together on being able to see what victims were receiving and what they continued to be eligible for. We also collaborated with the funeral burial homes on the benefits for the deceased victims and asked, we basically educated them on the claims that would come from victim comp and showed them the paperwork so that it could be streamlined and that they understood how the process worked. And that was really effective. It helped to expedite the needs of the families of the deceased victims. We also met on site at the Family Assistance Center and in various county agencies. We met with consultants from the Federal Office for Victims of Crime to review the response and the needs, to conduct a needs assessment, and basically look at what the current needs were that were being demonstrated, and also to look at what we could forecast as some of the more longer term needs. And the reason for doing this is because the federal government has a program called the Anti-Terrorism and Emergency Assistance Program. And that program provides grants for victims of mass violence, especially when the jurisdictions where these incidents occur are overwhelmed by the need and could use some financial assistance to meet the need of the victims. And the program has provided many grants to locations around the country. Some of the other incidents are the Pulse nightclub shooting, Virginia Tech, and there's many others that they've responded to. We were interested in an AEAP grant for the state of California, and Nevada was interested in one as well. And what ended up happening is that each of our states ended up applying for a grant, and we both received excuse me, individual grants. Nevada received a grant for $16 million to help with the ongoing needs of the victims and for the Resiliency Center and the service providers that are serving the victims directly. And the state of California received a grant for $8.3 million. And that the bulk of that grant is for compensation benefits for victims of the tragedy. Interestingly enough, we have paid close to $5 million in compensation to date. And the greatest need so far for the victims, and many people think it's going to be mental health or medical, but the greatest need has been for income loss benefits because people are having a difficult time returning to work, or they need to return to work on a modified schedule, or they're unable to go back to the job that they were originally working and need to adjust and find another type of work that would be more suitable for them. And I'll give you an example. We had one individual who worked in a facility where it's a warehouse type facility and there's a lot of noise. And following the shooting, it was very difficult to go back to that kind of an environment. It was very triggering because of the loud noises. And this individual asked his employer for some changes so that he would not have to be surrounded by those noises on a daily basis. Unfortunately, that employer was not able to work anything out, and it's sad because they're one of the things that I've noticed in all these responses is that there is a lot more that we can do with employers and small businesses to educate them about the impact of trauma on employees and what compassionate response and care might look like, because all employers do not have the same understanding of what victims might need to thrive in the workplace following an incident. So that's an ongoing need that we're seeing. Another thing that we did is we held victim forums in Las Vegas and also in Southern California. The bulk of the victims in California are from Southern California because many people in that region do travel to Las Vegas on the weekend. It's a short drive. So we held victim forums to hear from victims directly and mostly to hear about what their current needs were and also to find out how they were doing, how were they coping. And that was the best way to find out how we could be of help. And what we heard during those victims, many of those during those forums, is that many of the needs that were expressed there were included in the grant applications. So that was really helpful. We also heard some of the concerns, believe it or not, from the vendors. They were having issues with workers' compensation and also issues with receiving their income. Some of them were struggling greatly with even just knowing how they were going to put food on the table for the coming week. There were also victims from the immigrant community who were very leery of seeking assistance from the government. And so we tried to work through that to create a safe environment for victims so that they understood that we were there to help them and not to harm them in any way. So those were some of the issues that came up. Another thing I do want to say about the victim list is we also tried to work with the hospitals to find out what we could do for victims that were there and find out who was in catastrophic need so we could get them claim forms for compensation. One thing we did learn is many victims went into emergency rooms for minor injuries, and because of the number of people going into the emergency rooms, their names were not all recorded, and many people returned home. And that's another reason why an outreach campaign is so critical. And one of the items funded through our grant is a continuing outreach campaign, which we concluded another phase just recently that coincided with the 2-year anniversary for the Las Vegas incident. So we continue to work to get the word out. And we also realize that many victims of mass violence are really not feeling ready to talk about what they're experiencing, that they're not ready to reach out and ask for resources or to participate in support groups. Oftentimes, and you will see this with incidents going all the way back to the Oklahoma City bombing. People will come out years later and then express a readiness to participate in a support group or to seek benefits. The hard part about that is that some of the filing deadlines may have passed. But here in California, right now, we have a 3-year filing deadline. So victims of the Las Vegas incident do have until October 1st of next year to apply for assistance. I did want to talk a little bit about the Family Assistance Center. There were many agencies represented there to assist the victims, and this included the American Red Cross, and it included the FBI Rapid Deployment Team. It included the Department of Motor Vehicles, um, the Southern Nevada Legal Association was there to help victims with some legal issues they were dealing with in regards to landlord issues, employment, immigration. We also had childcare. We had food provided. We had Social Security. A variety of people that were at the Family Assistance Center set up by Clark County. And the list will go on and on. There were the hospitality industry was well represented with hotels and transportation, Uber. A lot of companies were donating services for victims or giving discounted Uber rides to the Family Assistance Center or just not charging at all. And hotels were offering complimentary lodging for family members that were flying in to either take care of victims or to come and work with funeral burial homes to set up funeral arrangements. So that was Las Vegas. Let's move on to the Borderline bar shooting, which happened on November 7th of last year. We just observed the 1-year anniversary for that incident. This was a country western bar in Thousand Oaks that's been around for about 25 years. It's a very large venue, and it was a Wednesday evening, close to 11 o'clock, when a shooter walked in a very short period of time took the lives of 12 people. Many of these folks were trying to escape. Some locked themselves in the restrooms. Some people were able to get out by climbing up to some windows that were located high up on the wall and run in a neighboring area. Um, so there were over 200 people that were impacted by this incident, and everybody who was in attendance that night, um, because the entire bar and the parking lot were considered the crime scene, none of the victims were able to access their cars. And the Ventura County District Attorney's Office did an incredible job of responding immediately and working with the victims and setting up an assistance center. And this was all during the horrific fires that were happening in Southern California at the very same time. It's also the same weekend that Malibu had the devastating fire. So all the victims of this incident, most of them were students because it was college night at the bar. They had to come to the Family Assistance Center in order to claim their car through the FBI when the FBI was ready to release the cars. And by coming into the Family Assistance Center, they were able to receive a lot of support. There was crisis counseling that was offered. That's offered at every Family Assistance Center. There was assistance from foundations in the community, the Ventura County Community Foundation, and also the Grimmie Foundation, the Christina Grimmie Foundation, set up for the singer who was gunned down in Orlando. Her family resides in Southern California, and they have a wonderful foundation that serves victims of crime. We also had present, in addition to victim compensation, the Red Cross. We had the DMV. We had some of the county agencies to help with employment issues that were coming up. The hospitality industry was represented as well, and there were several others that were helping. The very sad part of this is because the the bulk of the impacted community were college students. They were in school, and so it was very, very difficult for them to return and go back to their normal at school. And because of the time of year it was, they were going through exams and papers, and and also many of them were also experiencing the fires and being evacuated. So they had layer of trauma after layer of trauma. And some of these same victims had also been in Las Vegas and survived that. One of the 12 deceased had actually survived the Las Vegas concert and sadly lost his life during the Borderline bar shooting. One of the things that we did is we worked with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, their victim assistance section, to access some emergency funds to assist the victims with some needs that couldn't be covered through compensation. And Ventura County was able to work that out because of some really immediate and urgent needs on the case of victims or victim families. And between those emergency funds and what the FBI could also provide, and the foundations as well, there were a lot of good resources that could assist the victims with their recovery. We also had a mother of one of the deceased victims who was in the hospital about an hour away. She had been going through back surgery and was in recovery the evening that the shooting occurred. And so one of the victim advocates and I traveled to the hospital, which was an hour away. We had to time it around the closures of the freeways for the fire. Um, and that was difficult, but we ended up being able to get down there on a Sunday and meet with her and her family in the hospital. It was a very sad situation where she was feeling far removed from the assistance and the being able to grieve with others who were going through the same experience. So we went to her and were able to talk with her about what she was experiencing and about the resources that were available. Another thing that we did is we partnered with the district attorney's office on an intake form. And this was so when victims walk into a family assistance center, the first thing that's going to happen is there will be a reception area where we can verify that the people coming in were indeed present at the incident or that they're a family member and that they should be at the assistance center. So we have security and we have a reception area where victims are provided with an intake form, and a victim advocate is matched up as a companion with the victim to assist them with completing the form. And the form asks for a lot of information, identifying information and information about injuries and what types of needs the victim has. What we didn't want to do was to make victims, after they completed that form, make them complete a victim compensation application. So the intake form was revised to include some of the information that's needed on the comp form, and therefore, when a victim came to us to apply for compensation, all we had to do was get 2 additional pieces of information and an original signature and make copies of their insurance information. And that really helped to expedite things and get the applications into our system for processing. So that was our response to Borderline. We also did hold some victim forums. We held those in December of last year and also in August of this year. We had promised that we would hold follow-up forums with the victims to come back and find out how they were doing and if they had some ongoing needs. And I think the most wonderful thing that we've seen come out of these forums is how the community of victims are all supporting one another. And the other thing that's happened is that the Vegas victims in the area have also connected with the borderline victims, and they are all communicating with one another and going to support groups together. And it's really proved to be an enormous source of assistance. When we held the first set of forums in December, one of the most pressing needs we heard was about difficulties students were having in their courses, their college courses, and the impact of trauma, the inability to focus, the inability to meet a deadline, and things that we would consider normal responses to trauma. But a lot of the college personnel did not have a full grasp of how this impacted their students. And I would have liked to have seen a much more compassionate response, instead of students worrying, 1 and 2 days after the incident about not being excused from taking an exam, about worrying about a paper that's due the following week. Those were some of the difficulties that we encountered. We also had a couple of students who were not able to return for the semester, and so working with them to get a refund for their tuition because of their situation. Those were some of the issues. People were having difficulty going back to work, as can be imagined. And some people were isolating, and that is also a normal response. So we also worked to educate family members about how to work with their own family members who were victims of an incident, and to be able to communicate with them about the tragedy and make them feel as safe as possible. So those were some important pieces. When we held the second set of victim forums in August, what we didn't know is when we scheduled those, that they would fall immediately following the tragedies that happened in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio. Those all occurred on the first weekend of August of this year, and our forums were scheduled for the following Monday and Tuesday. And actually, that turned out to be a positive experience because of the way the victims had been triggered by these tragedies. So we were able to work with them about what they were experiencing, but also one of the things that they really wanted to do and that they asked is how could they support the victims of El Paso and Dayton. So it was tremendous to be able to see how they were coming together, to see how they could help one another. They really wanted to do something kind, is how they put it. And that's something that stayed with me about their need to want to do something for the other victims. I think that really there is one other item on the two other items for borderline. We were able to work with the Workers' Compensation Fund, the State Compensation Insurance Fund for the state of California, reached out, and we were able to meet together with the Ventura County DA's office. We met at the Family Assistance Center and were able to collaborate on benefits that would be provided to the victims. In other words, we did not want victims to be overwhelmed by the different resources that were available to them, or for them to have to figure out who was going to offer what benefits and how they would, be able to bring all of those together and meet all of their needs. So what we did is we first of all talked about what workers' comp was going to be able to provide, what victims' comp would be able to provide, and we created a resource sheet so that the victims would know what sources of income, what sources were available for income loss, for mental health assistance, for medical assistance, and we were working to make them as whole as possible. And we also looked at funeral burial coverage, what workers' comp could provide and what we would provide. And so what we were able to do was to provide some information on these combined resources. And that was really helpful for the victims. Another thing that happened is the owner of the Borderline Bar and Grill, he lost 5 of his employees in that shooting. And needless to say, his other staff were severely traumatized by what happened, those that were there and those that were not there. And workers' comp was able to provide mental health assistance for all the employees. And they were also working to form a support group, which they started. and workers' comp and victims' comp both were able to attend a couple of those support group meetings to assist victims with completing applications and answering questions that they had about resources. So that was a really helpful practice. And, workers' comp can be really intimidating for victims to navigate. So being able to have advocates who can help them navigate, or to have some case managers, navigators, whatever you'd like to call those positions, it's really helpful when you're a victim of mass violence to have someone who can guide you to what all the resources are and how they can help you short term and long term. So that is the borderline bar shooting. Let's move on to the next slide. Whoops. The Chabad House shooting in Poway, California, which occurred on April 27th of this year. We had an Orthodox Jewish community of about 100 people. It was a Saturday. It was the last day of Passover, and they were getting ready for one of the holiest services of the year, and a gunman walked in and started shooting. And as a result, one woman did lose her life. The rabbi was shot. A young 8-year-old girl was also shot, and her uncle, who was visiting from Israel, was also shot. These victims, because it was the Sabbath, they were horrified at what had happened. They were getting ready for a service in the main hall in the synagogue, and right next to the synagogue, the sanctuary, is the big multi-purpose room where all the children were for their activities. So when the rabbi saw the gunman walk in and saw what was about to happen, he immediately was running to the children. And unfortunately, he got shot and severely injured his hand and fingers. We had the DA's office in San Diego mobilize immediately with the crisis response team. They partnered with Jewish Family Services and also with the FBI, and they quickly opened a family assistance center in at a local high school, which was about 3 miles away from the shooting site. And unfortunately, nobody was showing up. And finally, a member of the community went to the high school and explained to them, because it was the Sabbath, that people were not going to be able to drive over to them. So the 3 agencies that were at the assistance center brought their services to the synagogue. Now, that is not a best practice that I would recommend to anyone. Nobody wants to have their assistance center at the scene of the incident. However, what they did is they set up the assistance center in the rabbi's home, which is considered an extension of the synagogue on the other side. And it was there where the victims were able to connect with the advocates from these 3 agencies and learn about resources and receive crisis counseling. And it was rather chaotic in the sense that all the law enforcement interviews were going on in the same vicinity. And there had also been a congregation at another church, which was located very close, just down the hill, where some of the folks in that church had also heard the shots, and they were hiding because they didn't know where the gun was or where the shots were coming from. So it was a chaotic scene. However, the 3 agencies that were serving the victims did remain at the rabbi's house. The community, because it was Passover and because they had been interrupted during a service, what they did is they took their holy scripture, which for their community is the Torah, and they took the scroll and they carried it down to the rabbi's home, where they were able to finish the service. And that was a healing thing for all of them. One of the other things that happened is the community requested some victim forums, And so we partnered with the Federal Office for Victims of Crime, who we also partnered on for the victim forums for Borderline as well and Las Vegas. And we're able to hold sessions with the victims about how to cope with trauma, what to expect, what's normal, and just provide some coping strategies, which we had done at the other forums as well. And also hear from folks about what were some of the concerns that they had, how were they adjusting to life back at home, at work, um, and really to give them some tools that they could take to help them as they went into the what they called back to their normal life. We also, before the victim forums, we received an education on how to work with the Jewish community, their cultural. Um, we wanted to be sensitive to the cultural needs as far as how we talked with people, how we dressed. And so those of us who led the forums, were very conscientious about our dress code when we went to meet with the victims, and also learning things about when you work with Jewish women, when you work with Jewish men, when you're talking with the rabbi, do you shake hands? All those kinds of things came up. And that really just shows the importance of understanding cultural differences. And that's something that's just come up this last week with the shooting in Fresno, sadly, is impacting the Hmong community. And so the Hmong community has their own cultural practices and perspectives on mental health. And therefore, the Fresno County DA's office is working with a local service provider that works and focuses on the Hmong community, and they're partnering together on providing those services. So again, it's always good to get that cultural education. So I highly recommend if you have that opportunity, and there are some very good resources to learn about different cultural traditions, and especially in regards to victim services, and what the perspectives are on when someone dies, perspectives on mental health, perspectives on trauma, and how you cope with that. Many people will go to their elders or to their religious community and not necessarily to a mental health provider. Um, so those are some of the things that we've been learning about. The victim forums for the Jewish community, we had a really good turnout. We also had a presentation from the U.S. Attorney's Office about the investigation. The DA's office talked about all the services that they were providing. We were able to do a claims clinic on site where advocates were able to work with victims following the forums, as well as at different times they were able to come on site and complete applications with the victims. A lot of the victims, and I'll be quite honest about this, when we first arrived, we had a victim complain that he had not received any help at all. And we had a hard time hearing that because of what we knew, what had been provided. And what we learned is there had been some miscommunications, and services had been offered, but different family members had been in touch with different providers. So we got that straightened out. And another aspect of that is, the impact of trauma. It does cloud. It sometimes clouds what you remember, and so we worked with victims to make sure they knew that they had access to us at all times, and that if something came up, and things do continue to come up, to contact us. And if we can't provide what's needed, we will try to find another resource that can. So that's very important. All right, so I think that covers what we provided for the Chabad house shooting. Let's move on to another incident. So in Davis, California, in January of this year, we had a law enforcement officer, Officer Natalie Corona, on a Thursday evening. It was January 10th. She was responding to a three-car traffic collision in downtown Davis. And I know this very well because I live in Davis. It's just outside of Sacramento. It's a university town. And it was about 6:45 in the evening. And some of us were getting messages on our phone through emergency services to avoid the downtown area because a law enforcement officer had been shot. And what happened is while Officer Corona was taking down the reports from the drivers, somebody in the vicinity rode up on a bike and shot her. And very sadly, later that evening, she lost her life. She was a young recruit, just recently out of the academy, someone who was very appreciated not only by the police department, but by the community at large because of her community service efforts. The entire Davis community, as well as the law enforcement community, was severely impacted by what happened. And there was a great need for assistance, not just for victims of this incident, but for the community at large. And so we worked with the Davis Police Department on talking about how we could collaborate. And what was decided was to set up a local assistance center at the police department. It's the first time we've ever done this. And this was so we could get the word out to the community that if there were people who were impacted by the incident, if they were in the vicinity, if they saw what happened, or if they were simply a member of the community and were not knowing how to handle their responses, that they could come into the center. There would be crisis counseling available. There would be victim compensation resources available. We partnered with Yolo Hospice on the crisis counseling, and this was all done through the Yolo County District Attorney's Office. They provided the victim advocates to assist the victims. And we also had UC Davis, the University of California, has a crisis response team on campus as well, and they had representatives come out, and it was good to collaborate with them as well. One of the victims that came in was a student whose backpack had actually been shot, but because of the textbooks in her backpack, she that saved her from getting shot. And she also lost a laptop computer. And as you all know, victim compensation cannot provide for personal property. Therefore, the UC Davis crisis response team was able to compensate for that and replace that laptop for the student. Some of the other victims that came in for assistance were we had a driver, one of the three drivers in the traffic collision, came in. He had seen everything that happened that evening and was in dire need of talking to a counselor, and also of getting some assistance. And so we were able to help him. Apparently, after the shooting occurred, he didn't know where to go or what to do. And so he came in with his girlfriend to get assistance. We also had other members of the community who were in the vicinity who saw what happened and again did not know where to go for assistance. So we also were working very actively on getting the word out through some outreach with the local media. And the Davis Police Department PIO was also working on this, as well as the UC Davis outreach office. So we had a lot of outreach happening. There was also a Yolo County bus that got stopped when the shooting happened. It was on the block right across the street from where the shooting occurred. The bus was there, and once the shooting happened, the traffic stopped. That bus could not move, and there had been bullets fired through one of the windows. And the bus driver asked everybody on the bus to get on the floor, which they did. Because the bus could not move, they were just not knowing if a shooter was going to enter the bus, if it was going to get shot up. And they couldn't get up to look out the windows to see what was happening. And it wasn't until the bus driver was finally able to navigate the bus onto another side street that they realized what had happened and that their lives were and they actually didn't know for a little while whether or not the shooter was still on the run or what was happening. And so the folks on the bus did not know where to go. So we had a variety of people come in. It was not a huge number of people, but the people that we served did need the services. We had a law enforcement officer come in who had recently retired with his wife from another jurisdiction and seek assistance. And so we were really happy to collaborate with the police department on this effort, and I think it's a model for other communities that might experience the shooting of a law enforcement officer. Sadly, they're happening with more frequency, and something that you might look at is and also having a community debriefing where people can come together and talk about what they're experiencing. Sometimes it's not just enough to have a funeral procession or a memorial. People need to talk about their genuine responses to these incidents, and bringing in some mental health providers and some community leaders to do a joint debriefing is another valuable tool. So let's talk a little bit about the terrorist attacks in San Bernardino. This was an incident that impacted county staff, and they were in a training workshop at the Inland Regional Center on December 2nd when a shooter came in and took the lives of several people and greatly injured several others. And the employees that worked for the county who were present, the employees that were not present but worked in the same department, and the county as a whole was significantly impacted by this incident. The shooter was actually also an employee. The good thing about this response effort is that San Bernardino County had a pre-existing crisis counseling team that was in place to help law enforcement, and they were able to deploy immediately to assist with the response to the victims, and all the county staff and law enforcement that were impacted by what happened that day. And they provided a significant amount of services in person. They also were able to set up an 800 number, which proved to be very valuable for people to call in and be able to talk to someone, especially if it was late at night. This was a number that had a 24-hour access. So that was a practice that worked well. The county also set up death notification teams, and this is when victim advocates teamed up with the FBI and the coroner's office, and also spiritual care, chaplains or clergy. So a combination of those folks teamed up to go out and deliver in-person death notifications. And I just want to throw out that I hope everybody participating in this webinar today, that all of you, that your jurisdictions provide in-person death notifications. I have heard on occasion that sometimes the notifications are made up by phone, and I would ask you to please never ever do that. Please make sure that these notifications are in person. That really is the most trauma-informed way to do this. It's a moment that's going to be horrific for those receiving the news. It's a moment they're going to remember for the rest of their lives. And it's also a moment where you don't know how they're going to react. They may pass out. They may have some sort of a physical response that requires immediate medical attention. So there's a wide variety of reasons to do these notifications in person. Another best practice from the San Bernardino response was the formation of some liaison teams. We had staff from the Department of Behavioral Health that were assigned to the families of the victims and victims themselves to help them navigate through services that they might need. If they had an immediate need, they could just contact this one person, and that person would help them get resources that they needed. And it's not the same as a victim advocate. This would be for other types of services and more immediate types of needs, with helping out with family needs. And so the liaisons were able to handle that type of communication. we did partner with the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office to apply for an AEAP grant. And the grant has been very helpful in providing compensation benefits as well as a number of other services for the county staff and the victims. And some of the services that were provided included the staff hiring of two staff. One was a wellness coordinator and the other was a human resources officer. And these positions were able to help the victims. They were designed to help them navigate the workers' compensation system and to navigate through the myriad resources that were available to them, and also to work directly with their human resources office on their income loss needs and how their paychecks would be factored, how income loss benefits would and workers' comp benefits would be applied to their paychecks. So there were some significant needs on the part of human resources and case management that required the hiring of a couple of additional specialized staff to help these victims. The victims also helped people who worked for the county. These staff helped victims that worked for the county who may not have been present at the incident, but they worked in the same department and were grieving for the loss of their fellow employees. The staff that worked in that department, they all relocated to a different site because it was just too traumatic to go back to the same workplace and see all the empty desks of those whose lives had been lost during the attack. The funds also help to support peer support training, management training for county staff on the impact of trauma on their staff, COBRA benefit coverage, post-critical trauma workshops, and community resiliency forums, which are ongoing and are designed for county staff and the community at large to talk about the impact of ongoing trauma, coping strategies, and basically how to get back to some sense of normalcy when you're recovering from an incident like this. And I do want to say, having worked with victims back since September 11th, that I think the greatest or one of the greatest sources of healing that I have personally witnessed is the impact of these peer support groups. After 9/11, we received crisis response grants from the Federal Office for Victims of Crime, and the bulk of the funding of those grants went towards the funding of these support group meetings that went on for 3 years. And because the victims were so spread out throughout the state in Northern California and Southern California, we had one support group a month on a Saturday in Northern California and one Saturday a month in Southern California. And we contracted with therapists from the UCSF Trauma Recovery Center. And it was a pilot project at the time, and that has since evolved into another grant project that's administered by CalVCB. And so we worked with these therapists to put together these support group meetings. And the first part of the meetings would be what we called psychoeducation, where we would cover a topic and educate the group on something that was relevant to them. For example, if you were having sleep issues, how to cope with that. If you were unable to return to work, how would you cope with that? If you're having difficulties with relationships, how can you cope with that? And even after hearing from the therapist, I think just that for the group to hear from one another on how they were coping was really good learning. And we also talked about how to create memorials and other practical topics. So that would be the first half of the meeting. And the second half of the meeting would be allowing the group to communicate with one another about how they were doing, what they were experiencing at the time, what some of their challenges were. Lots of tears, but also hope. There was significant hope that came from these support groups. And at the end of the 3 years, you did see an incredible evolution. You saw an incredible amount of resiliency, and it was very nice to see how the support groups had helped. And I'm looking at the time and I realize we should get moving on our PowerPoint here. Okay, so one thing that's really important when you're responding to mass violence is to make sure before anything happens right now, make sure you have translation resources in place. Make sure your applications and brochures and any materials that you're going to need to respond are translated into the various languages that are in your region. And also have a resource list of translators that can be called in. And you want to vet your translators to make sure that they're comfortable in dealing with trauma-informed issues and victim cases. Sometimes the details can be graphic or it can really be taxing. And so you want to have translators that are prepared to handle that type of communication. I will tell you that in one mass violence event, it was difficult to find interpreters or translators for some of the language needs. So we had to scramble at the last minute. I do know that there's one large-scale incident that happened in the country a few years ago where they needed their application translated into Spanish and they didn't have it, and it got translated overnight into Spanish. So if you can make sure that happens beforehand, and also sign language interpreters, make sure you have pre-vetted list of those resources. Okay, so let's move on. All right, here's some best practices for the initial response period following an incident. Setting up a family assistance center. So we talked a little bit about the assistance centers that were set up for these other incidents. In Las Vegas, the assistance center was at a convention center, and that's because of the large scale of the incident. The number of impacted people was close to 24,000. For Borderline, the number of impacted people was in the hundreds. We had over 200 victims, and then if you add their family members and companions, that number grows. That assistance center was actually set up in an office building that was donated by one of the supervisors on the Board of Supervisors. And it was actually a great location because you need a location that has several rooms where you can have separate rooms for private crisis counseling meetings with victims or families, private interview rooms. Law enforcement will want to come in and talk with families and answer questions about the investigation or what happened. And so they need private conference rooms for that. And then you do want to have a general area where resource agencies can set up tables with brochures and talk with victims and family members about the various resources they have to offer. You also need a reception area where you can greet victims and complete an intake process with them. Excuse me, you'll want an area where food can be provided for staff separately from the victims. You'll also want a child care area if the need arises. And sadly, you need a very private place to deliver death notifications if that's needed at the Family Assistance Center. And one word of caution here, wherever you set up that area for death notification, please make sure it's in a place where other people cannot see. If people know that a certain room is designated for death notifications, and then they all of a sudden are called over there, that's not going to be a good response. You need to make sure that it's confidential away people don't know. And you want an area that's going to allow you to really be able to spend time with the family. So you want an area where you can set up all these individual rooms. That's really important. The other thing that's important to note is a good best practice, as we talked about, is these death notification teams where it's not just the medical examiner, but you could have spiritual care, a victim advocate from the DA's office or the FBI to help participate in that. And they can meet with families in that private conference room, creating the liaison teams. Another best practice, and this is from the state of Colorado, dealing with media response, they assigned one public information officer per family to help them navigate through the media process and actually, to help them decide who they wanted to talk to, who they didn't, and basically to also protect them from the onslaught of the media that was coming their way. Community forums with mental health professionals. So these are some of the community debriefs that you can hold in the days and weeks following an incident. It's important to remember these forums will often get set up in the immediate aftermath, but sometimes you need to do them on a regular basis. A community doesn't heal overnight. And, if you do one maybe a month later, a few months later, and it's not that you want the community to be focused and stuck on the incident, but it's more about seeing what progress they've made and if there's any ongoing needs. Oftentimes at family assistance centers, you'll also have family and survivor briefings, and this will be done by the lead law enforcement agency. So you'll want to have a separate area and a confidential area for that. We talked about having a crisis counseling area in the Family Assistance Center, but you also, it would make total sense to have a pre-vetted list of mental health providers in your area that can help provide services for small scale, medium scale, and large scale incidents. And one thing I neglected to mention about the Family Assistance Centers is you will want to have pre-designated sites for different sizes of incidents, and that should be part of your community, your county emergency management plan. Make sure that those family assistance centers are set up and that you know what site you can use. You obviously do not want a center that where if people have to drive by the scene of the incident to get to the Family Assistance Center, you don't want to do that. You want a place that has easy parking, that's easily accessible, and that's also ADA compliant. So there's all those issues that you want to look at. But you should have a few pre-designated sites for each scale. So have 3 sites for a small scale incident, 3 sites for medium, 3 for large. And also, if you have a big region that you cover, you may want to have pre-designated sites in different regional areas as well. So please make sure that you know what those pre-designated sites are. Another best practice for the initial response period is to set up memorial areas like a memorial garden or some sort of place where victims and families can go to have a time of quiet, of remembrance. Sometimes they will ask to be taken to the site, and it's a really nice practice to escort people to the site and to be with them. Yes, give them their privacy, but be there in case they need somebody. Outreach practices. We talked about a website resource page about public service announcements. Have an 800 number already set up for people to call into to get information about resources. Have a social media campaign ready to go. Have some sample quotes or announcements that you can make on Twitter and Facebook and whatever social media that you use. Also have a press release ready to go where you just need to plug in the information about the incident and know what your local media outlets would be. If you have a strong cultural representation in your area, certain cultural groups are heavily represented in your region, make sure that you have links to what we call ethnic media, and make sure that you know who those people are so you can get the word out to them immediately as well. Excuse me. All right. One of the things that you want to do is when you're identifying cultural needs, if you're in a vicinity that is a rural population and it's hard for people to access services, there is something called a mobile family assistance center, and that is, it could be a trailer, it could be a group of people going traveling to a rural area and providing assistance on site to provide easy access. And these would be crisis counselors, it would be victim advocates, it would be whatever needs you have because of this incident, have those people go to the community. And that should be part of your emergency management plan, is how do you reach out to the rural community. Okay, make sure you have go bags. Go bags are going to be the items that you're going to need to respond to an incident. And you should have one ready to go in your office, and also a personal one. And this would include all the items you need to respond, whatever you would need from your office, translated victim compensation forms, all the tools that you would need, water bottles, badges. If you have t-shirts for your office that identify which team you work with, make sure you have all of that. We do have lists for items to include in these go bags, and I can get those to you if you're interested. But I'm kind of just quickly going through these slides because we have limited time. But please make sure that you have those go bags ready to go. And I keep one in my car. Okay, I'm just getting some water here, guys. All right. For victim compensation, you'll want a streamlined victim compensation process. So we have a template for an emergency application that we just update for whatever the incident is that just happened. We also set up a tracking system. We create a single point of contact for the county to answer questions about eligibility. And we also have a press release that's ready to go. And we also make sure our applications are translated into the appropriate languages that we need for the state of California. We also have a field response team here at the California Victim Compensation Board that's ready to go. There's about 17 staff who have been trained and ready to go to a family assistance center and to help with taking applications on site, and also to help in other areas as well, depending on what the needs of the family assistance center are. And we come down to help when the county DA's office asks for our assistance. So just please know that we will always offer our assistance, and if you need us to come down, we can do that. We've done that for the borderline bar response. We did it, and we've done it for a few other incidents as well. So please let us know if we can be of assistance that way. I did talk about some of these outreach strategies already, so I'm going to skip through this. We do create a special handout that has frequently asked questions and resources for victims when a mass violence incident occurs, and we post those on our website, which is victims.ca.gov, and you can see that on our page. We have a link there to our mass violence resources. So another thing that comes up is the donation fund aspect of the response, and this can color people's perception of the entire response, how you handle the donation funds. You need to be very transparent with this process. And I will tell you that Ventura County did an excellent job with the donation fund strategy. One of the things you want to do is make sure you hear from the community and from the victims especially on what the needs are and how they would like the donation funds to be dispersed. And after hearing them out, you form a board, a group that represents the group of victims that have been impacted by this tragedy, as well as the community. So it could be some community leaders and some victim representatives, and you want them to be the ones deciding on what's the best way to disperse these funds. You don't want to leave anyone out, but of course it's also going to depend on how much money is in the donation fund. For Ventura County, everyone was allowed mental health funds to deal with the trauma that they suffered as a result of the tragedy. So whether or not you were present at the incident, you did qualify for mental health assistance. And I can't reiterate this enough, everyone. That donation fund process has got to be as transparent as possible. All right, I'm just looking at the time. All right, I'm going to tell you to please collaborate with your service providers beforehand so that you have a team in place ready to go when an incident happens. Um, and I also want to remind you that there are resources available on the federal level through the Federal Office of Victims of Crime. The FBI will often send their rapid deployment team known as the Crisis Response Team. The U.S. Attorney's Office provides significant help with the trial process. And the Federal Office of Victims of Crime offers consultants as well to help with needs assessment, with the immediate response to an incident, with the writing of a grant proposal, whatever might be needed. Another thing you might do at the local level is establish an unmet needs committee to monitor the ongoing needs that have been demonstrated and to make sure that progress is being made to address those needs. And also have some pre-existing relationships with your local nonprofit providers, including the Red Cross, United Way, Salvation Army. Airbnb provides complimentary lodging in many disaster situations, including mass violence. All right. I'm going to skip ahead to the planning section. Make sure you keep thorough documentation, because if you do apply for a grant, and even just for your own record, keep written records of everything, how your decisions are made, so that you can keep your lessons learned in one section, and also about all your expenses and staffing items. Keep tracking those so that you have a log that you can use if you do apply for a grant. Mass violence emergency response plans. Okay, so partnerships are very critical. If you're a victim service agency, you want to make sure that you are at the table with your county emergency management, and you want to make sure that they know who victim services is or are in your community. I will tell you that to this day, there are county emergency manager offices who don't know about victim services in their community, and they learn about them either when an incident occurs or when someone just happens to mention it to them. So please actively seek a meeting with them, get at the table, and get victim services into your county emergency management plan. Coordinate with local, state, and federal resources. So your local resources would be the Federal Office for Victims of Crime. I'm sorry, your federal resources, Federal Office for Victims of Crime and the FBI. State resources, you have the California Victim Compensation Board or whatever it might be in your state, and then your victim assistance administrator. In some states it's combined, in some states it's separate, and then your local, the county district attorney's office, the nonprofit providers that have victim advocates, and also your county emergency managers. Coordinate with all of those real resources. As I told you, we have a field response team that can assist with a response, and you might look at your jurisdiction, your entity, to see if you have a trained crisis response team, or do you need to provide training. If you do, I would recommend that you get a plan in place to train that team. And that team should be multidisciplinary, represent the various aspects of a response so that you have representatives from all fields that are needed to respond. You're going to have victim services, nonprofit providers, behavioral health, the Salvation Army, who's very good with donation management, especially when you need storage space such as warehouses. When the Sandy Hook shooting happened, they had thousands of teddy bears that were donated, and they had to store them in a warehouse, and the United Way and Salvation Army helped with storing those resources. So I highly recommend that you create a plan and protocol now for what your agency will do immediately following a mass violence incident. And it's not just for the external response, but your internal response as well, to meet your staffing issues and who's going to do what. How will your funding work? Have that all worked out beforehand. Make sure you have separate applications for mass violence incidents, and a streamlined one, because that will help expedite the process. And then, all right, I'm going to skip over this, and I want to talk to you about All right, so for the state of California, we worked with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, and in 2017, they added victim services to the state of California's emergency response plan. And they put us particularly in two emergency support functions. The first one is number 13 under law enforcement, about providing financial compensation to eligible victims of crime and when they have no other sources of reimbursement. And also the other emergency support function, number 14 under recovery. Again, it's financial compensation for eligible victims for short and long-term recovery. And then it talks about the types of different benefits that we provide. And so in your state, the question is going to be, does your state emergency response plan include victim services? And then even more so, does your local county emergency management plan include victim services? And so there's a poll question here that I believe Natalia and Riley are going to administer right now. And the question is, do you currently have a mass violence response plan in place for your office or organization? Well, that's better than I thought. That's good news. Okay, so we have 46% who said yes and 54% that said no. All right, so for the 54% that said no, your call to action is going to be to get that plan started and to give yourself a deadline. And in particular, to please meet with your local jurisdiction and your state jurisdiction, depending on what type of agency you are, to get this process started. For those of you who said yes, I want to ask you how well prepared your team is to respond. That would be the next question for you. And do you need additional training? So that's where I would ask you for your call to action. And I'm going to encourage you to really focus on the training, statewide training, as well as local training. And as I said, meet with your city and county emergency managers to get into the local plan. Form a city county steering committee for mass violence incidents if you don't have one. And also forming mutual aid partnerships with those that will be needed in a response, so that that's ready to go. You know who to call on, and you can learn from one another as well. You can hold regional meetings with those mutual aid partners to talk about how you're going to respond and to continually update your plan and your agreements. And with that, I do want to close by emphasizing a wonderful resource for everyone, and I'm hoping many of you already know about the OVC Mass Violence Toolkit. There is a link here to that toolkit that provides a number of checklists and resources that you can use to help plan and prepare, to help respond, and also it helps with long-term recovery. So it's a wealth of information, so I encourage you to go there as well. Also, another important aspect is self-care. If you or your team respond, please make sure to engage in some very, very comprehensive self-care and to have strategies in place on how you're going to do that. We don't have time to get into the particulars of that, but I'm going to encourage you to talk amongst your staff about this. Remember about the AEAP program being available if you need assistance. And I'm going to skip over this and also let you know about the annual Leave No Victim Behind conference that focuses on best practices for mass violence response. We just held our fourth one last month, and we are beginning to plan for the fifth one, which will be held next fall, and we'll keep you posted on announcements relating to that conference. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Wow, that was amazing, Anita. Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful webinar with lots of wonderful points, and really just was really exciting to hear about the intersection of how agencies and communities can respond to mass violence and what role family justice centers can play in that as well. And so thank you for the wealth of information that you shared and the resources. We did have a few questions and they're still coming in. A couple just kind of quick ones that maybe you can answer. One attendee asked, how do we find out if an in-person death notification is offered in the community? And if there is none, then how does one get involved?
So you would contact the local coroner's office, your county coroner, or medical examiner. They're usually the ones that make death notifications. So talk with them, and also talk with the victim advocates in your DA's office to see how they do it. But I think a good thing to do is to get some preliminary information, and then depending on the responses, maybe getting a meeting together with the folks involved and talk about some collaborative death notification teams.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, that's great. And then some other attendees also wanted some more information on what a family/survivor briefing included and what was part of that.
Okay, so victim forums are one thing, family survivor briefings are another thing. Family survivor briefings are usually conducted by law enforcement and community leaders, and they often will be answering questions about the investigation or the incident, what happened, some really sensitive material sometimes about the ongoing investigation. Also, oftentimes resources will be offered at these meetings, such as victim compensation, crisis counseling. That's usually what's covered during a family or survivor briefing.
Wonderful. Thank you. And it looks like that is the extent of the questions we had right now. I do want to let folks know, and Anita, if you are willing to share some of those resources that you kind of talked about during the presentation, like the list of what goes into go bags, we are more than happy to put that as part of the handouts and resources on our resource library.
Sure.
Wonderful. And so we'll make sure all of our attendees receive that as a follow-up as well. Perfect. Well, thank you again so much, Anita, for that. That was a really wonderful presentation. Again, we're so grateful for your expertise and for the time that you have spent with us. Just so everyone has your information, there's Anita's contact information. We will also, if anybody has any lingering questions after the webinar and they want to send those our way, we will make sure we send them to Anita and get you connected and a response to any of your questions. So with that, Anita, thank you so much again for the presentation. A few reminders before we end our webinar. We will be talking about how to handle trauma, how your agency can help train others in trauma, the impact in the cross-section of mass violence, and many of the things that Anita talked about in our conference on May 19th to 21st here in San Diego. So if you're able to join us, we'd love to see you here in San Diego. Save the dates. Our next webinar is actually going to be on January 21st. The topic will be trauma-informed courts with Judge Lynn Tepper from Florida. She'll be discussing ways that courts and court personnel and staff can be more trauma-informed. Again, another great session you all can join. As a final reminder, this presentation is being recorded. We will be posting the materials and any additional resources Anita has provided in the next few days on our resource library. You will receive an email with instructions on how to obtain them and how to view all of these materials, as well as a certificate of attendance. And so once again, Anita, it was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much for the wealth of information you provided, and we hope all of you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.